So let's go ahead and start balancing chemical equations. We're going to go ahead and work through 3 different examples. At first we'll go pretty slow, and then afterwards we'll try to speed it up a little bit from there. So here's our first example. The first thing that we need to go ahead and go through is to make sure what elements show up on the left-hand side or the reactant side also need to show up on the right-hand side or the product side. If that is not the case, then something is wrong with the problem. So now we need to go over how many of each element we have on both sides. In video 1, we went over how to go ahead and do this. So I'm going to assume that you watched that video and go ahead and show you the numbers that we should get. Okay, so let's go ahead and go over these numbers and where they come from. So there's no number next to the Ca, so that's a 1. There's no number next to the C, so that's also 1. And then the 3 corresponds to that oxygen. So that's where these numbers come from. On the product side, Ca has no number, so that is a 1. I'm going to skip over the oxygen because we actually have more oxygen from this compound. So let's go to the carbon. This carbon has no number, so it is also 1. Going to the oxygens now, we have 2 oxygens from the CO2, and we have 1 oxygen from the CaO. Add those 2 together, and that's where the 3 comes from. So this reaction is actually balanced. If you go through and figure out how many of each element you have, and the numbers are exactly the same on both sides, it is already balanced and you are done. So let's go ahead and move on. So here we have our second example for going over balancing chemical equations. In the middle we have listed all the elements that we have, so potassium, iodine, and chlorine. And we need to go ahead and make sure we balance each side. Before we go ahead and do that, let's go ahead and again write down how many of each element we have from the reactant and the product sides. So unlike our first example, our numbers don't match up, which symbolizes that we need to go ahead and balance this reaction. The only thing that we can touch in the reaction is a coefficient, which is going to be the number that goes in front of the compounds. So I'm going to go ahead and denote those with a little green box. Okay, so now we have our green boxes, and this is where we can put numbers or coefficients in that will multiply the numbers that we already have figured out underneath our yields arrow. So to go ahead and balance, we need to kind of figure out what our strategy is going to be. Now in this video, if I start one way, that doesn't mean you can't start another way and get the same exact answer. On the left-hand side, or reactant side, we have 2 chlorines, and we do not have 2 chlorines on the reactant side. So I'm going to go ahead and start by putting a 2 in front of KCl. By placing this 2 in this box, now we are going to have 2 potassium and 2 chlorines on our product side. Showing your math is a good idea, just like I just show in our numbers. You can see how I crossed out the 1 and now placed a 2 for each of them. We don't have anything in the box in front of the I2, and so nothing changes for the iodine. Now looking at our numbers, we're still not balanced all the way, but we did go ahead and fix our issue of the chlorines not being balanced. To balance the K and the I, we actually need to bounce back to the reactant side, kind of like ping pong, and see what we can do here. Now on the reactant side, we do have K and I together, and they both need to be a 2 based off the numbers that we have here. So let's go ahead and put a 2 in front of the Ki on the reactant side. By placing a 2 on the reactant side in front of the Ki, I now am able to cross out these 1s, and both K and I now have 2. And if we compare every single one of our numbers on our list, we have 2 potassium on either side, we have 2 iodines on each side, and we have 2 chlorines on either side. So we're now balanced. We could have went ahead and started with this 2 instead, and then we would have ended up doing this 2 second. Again, the order does not matter, I just want to make that apparent. So now we have our check mark and balance over to the left-hand side, and we are done with this problem. Let's go ahead and move on to our third example, and you'll be ready to go with balancing chemical equations. So here's our third example, and we'll go ahead and work through this pretty quickly. It's a little bit more complex. We have a little bit more elements here, but once we go over it, you really do have the tools to go ahead and balance anything. So let's go ahead and figure out how much of each element we have and then move on from there. Okay, so you see our list of numbers that we have, and we have 3 that are not balanced. So we have our chlorine that's not balanced, our oxygen, and our hydrogen that's not balanced. So let's go ahead and see what we can do there. I'm going to go ahead and start with my chlorine. You, again, can start with other things if you prefer. And so to do this, I'm going to go ahead and place a 2 in front of my NaCl so that my 2 over here is balanced. So let's go ahead and fix for putting the 2 in front of the NaCl. So I'm going to cross out my Na1 and put a 2, and cross out my 1 to get a 2 for there. And so now you see that I corrected for the NaCl having a 2 in front of it. So now I need to go ahead and fix the fact that I just put a 2 in front of Na, making this Na2. So I'm going to go ahead and put a 2 in front of my NaOH to hopefully fix that. Alright, so when I go ahead and fix my numbers, once I put a 2 in front of my NaOH, this 2 is going to distribute to the Na, to the O, and to the H. So when I fix that, all these 1s change to 2, and by comparing my list here, every single number is the same now. And so this is now balanced. Alright, so at this time, I hope that you've watched both of the videos I've posted for how to balance a chemical equation. If you haven't, you can always go back, and you can always rewatch them. But at this time, if you've made it through both videos, you really can tackle any balancing chemical equation problem that's thrown your way. Keep in mind that some of them might be a little bit more difficult. As teachers, we like to, throw some at you that might be a little bit more difficult. So think of them as a puzzle. Keep trying. Use that eraser if you need to. And good luck. You have what you need to do to be able to balance any chemical equation you might have.